It soon becomes possible to guess within a few years the date of any team photograph, not only by the style of dress, but by the poses and increasing discipline of the grouping. Through these photographs, we can read the change in the whole status of sport that has taken place since the 1860s. Before that date, there hadn't been many teams or champions to be photographed. There was not only no Wimbledon, but as yet no game of lawn tennis at all. It wasn't invented until the 1870s, the same decade that saw the beginnings of Test cricket and the county championship, the main football competitions, and the open golf tournament. In fact, we can see photography and organised sport together as two strands in the extraordinary history of 19th century England, where so many of the institutions we take for granted today developed roughly in parallel, all reinforcing one another. Things like railways and education and public health and democratic voting and trade unions and photography and sport. As people packed into cities and endured the impoverished daily life of an industrial society, there were intense pressures to develop popular versions of those freedoms that were hitherto the privilege of the rich. Sport became a key element in a society characterized by organization and rational competition. In the 1860s, it became necessary for the first time to raise football above its many local variants and establish uniform rules, and the game split into the rival codes of rugby and association. The FA Cup was started on the model of the knockout house competition at Harrow. It was at first won by sides from the public schools, but the victory of Blackburn Olympic in 1883 symbolised the takeover of the game by the people. Among the All England 11 of 1847 is a private schoolmaster called Nicholas Wannerstrocht. He played, however, under the pseudonym of Felix, since when he started his career in the 20s, parents might have regarded the game of cricket, which was still associated with gambling, as a disreputable and frivolous activity for their son's teacher. 30 years later, fee-paying parents would have been more likely to object to a staff that didn't contain a first-class player to inspire and coach his pupils. In this period, sport became respectable and available to all as spectators, if not as players, and a multitude of organizations grew up to promote it. One book became the Bible of this whole movement, Tom Brown's School Days. Thomas Hughes was at Rugby under its great reforming headmaster, Thomas Arnold. In the first part of the book, he celebrates the traditional sports of the country, as played at its feasts or seasonal festivals. But Tom Brown then goes to Rugby and is immersed in regular cricket and football.
He was very clear. He was not a great writer, but he had a very sharp mind. And I read him the book when I was about 8, Tom Brown's School Days, and I'm reading it up to today. A few months ago, I read the book again. And as I grew to, I loved the book for what it said about the games that I was interested in. But then later, I began to see that Hughes had understood that England had become an industrial country, but he had a great liking for the games of the village feast, and he had them to a degree that nobody else had. I think Hughes was concerned not so much with the value of cricket, but with the principles that permeated the game by that time, and which had permeated the game. I am trying to emphasize this, that Dr. Arnold's ideas, which he was trying to instill into behavior, were things that were not easy for scholarship to incorporate, but on the cricket field and football field, and Hughes was very much aware of this, there they were of great value and were important.
"Oh, Brown, can't I go in next?" shouted the swiper. "Whose name is next on the list?" said the captain. "Oh, do let the swiper go in," chorused the boys. Tom yielded, against his better judgment. "I dare say now I've lost this match by this nonsense," he said. "Come now, none of your irony, Brown," answered the master. "I'm beginning to understand this game scientifically. What a noble game it is, too." "Isn't it, sir? But it's more than a game. It's an institution," said Tom. Yes, said Arthur, the birthright of British boys, old and young, as habeas corpus and trial by jury are of British men. The discipline and reliance on one another which it teaches is so valuable, I think, went on the master. It ought to be such an unselfish game. It merges the individual in the 11. He doesn't play that he may win, but that his side may. That's very true, said Tom, and that's why football and cricket, now one comes to think of it, are such much better games than fives or hare and hounds or any of the others, where the object is to come first or to win for oneself, and not that one side may win. And then the captain of the 11, said the master, what a post is his in our school world. Almost as hard as the doctor's, requiring skill and gentleness and firmness, and I know not what other rare qualities. What a sight it is, broke in the master, the doctor as a ruler. Perhaps ours is the only little corner of the British Empire which is thoroughly, wisely and strongly ruled just now. I'm more and more thankful every day of my life that I came here to be under him. So am I, I'm sure, said Tom, and more sorry that I've got to leave.
Dr. Arnold is a man whom it is not too easy to understand today unless you understand what he was trying to do. Personally, he was a man who was interested in religion, and above all, he was interested in principled behavior by persons who had social authority. They had to be aware that what they were doing was for the benefit of society as a whole and the improvement of religion and morality. Later in his life, he got very interested in learning and in the study of the development of the intellect. But what is fantastic, the British middle class and those members of the aristocracy who realized that a change was necessary took from him his interest in religion, his concern for moral behavior and principled conduct, but they were not interested particularly in his intellectual ideas. They dropped that. All the doctor's ideas became part of cricket and football, although he himself was not interested in them. And I think him more important than Carlyle and Ruskin for this reason. They wrote and told people what to do. Arnold did more than that. He actually educated people in his school, and he was so successful that all over England the public schools began to follow what Dr. Arnold was doing. In other words, he was not only a theorist, but he was a politician, a practical man who did certain work which had an enormous effect on England, the industrialization of England, and the steadiness with which the British ruling class governed England and the principles which they instilled.
Imperial cricket shows how the English have introduced their national game into every quarter of the globe, from China to the west coast of Africa, from Hong Kong to the West Indies, from Melbourne to Mysore. The game is played wherever a pitch can be procured and two teams got together. At a period when the great national pastime of more or less continual internecine warfare has, under the British Raj, fortunately been relegated more nearly to its proper place in the relations of mankind, it is not a thing without national advantages if the love of cricket, from Raja downwards, leads the natives of India to develop the moral and physical qualities of endurance and self-restraint, of perseverance and comradeship, which the practice of that game almost unconsciously teaches. Men need some incentive to keep themselves fit, and much training ere they can school themselves to endure the chagrin of personal failure or disappointment. This incentive and that training are furnished by the love of cricket as by hardly any other of the arts of peace, short of boxing.